Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Graytech Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is John Abrams. He's a visionary business leader, author, and pioneer in employee ownership. John co-founded South Mountain Company, an architectural, building, and solar firm that became one of the first worker cooperatives in the US, setting a gold standard for purpose-driven business in construction. He now mentors others on creating lasting impact through democratic ownership. And his latest book, From Founder to Future, is a roadmap for building companies with an enduring integrity. Welcome to the show, John.
Nice to see you, Todd.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. So as we get started, I'd love to hear kind of your journey into construction. What brought you into this world to begin with?
Well, it was kind of a wild one. So I got drawn into the back to the land movement in the late 60s and completely excited by the potentials there. And then, we lived in these various rural places way out in the middle of nowhere and needed to keep the rain off of us. And so we started experimenting with structures, and I became passionate about building. And then it became, it was all very seat of the pants. We didn't know what we were doing. The first real house we ever built, a neighbor, we heard he wanted to build a house. We went and saw him. We said, Harry, here you want to build a house? And he said, yeah, can you guys build a house? And my partner Mitchell and I said, yeah, sure. And he said, you're hired. And we were living in a house with no electricity. And every night we would have books spread out on the floor and a ring of kerosene lamps. And we'd be figuring out what we had to do the next day. Oh, joist that goes into the rim. How does that fasten in there? And it was just a crash course in building.
Yeah, by fire there for sure.
Oh my God, yeah. Several years later, we were asked to do a house on Martha's Vineyard, and we moved there kind of unintentionally. We thought we'd be there for about 6 months, get this house done, go back to Vermont with a pocket full of money. A year later, we were still slaving away on this timber frame, handcrafted house. Money was all gone, and somebody else asked us to build a house, and we ended up staying. And I ended up in business at the age of 25, and South Mountain just became, it was very organic, slow growth. I would say in 1987, so we were probably 12 or 14 years old, about that many employees, and two close friends who had been with me from the start said, we don't want to go out and start our own business. We want to make our career here, but we need more of a stake. And at that point, I could have made them partners, but I thought, well, if we do our job well, this situation will come up again and again. Maybe we can invent a structure that will welcome new owners over time. We fortunately stumbled on the worker co-op. We did not have to invent it, and we became one of the early worker co-ops. And then there were these junctures, Todd, in these hinge points in the history of the company that propelled us to new places. In 2003, I took a 6-month sabbatical to write a book and experiment with distributed management in the company. The 6 months ended. The book wasn't done. The experiment had been a failure. Morale had tanked. So I went back, and we spent another 6 months figuring out, what did we do wrong? What could we have done better? What could make this thing work? And then I left again for 6 months. I finished the book, and the system we had put in place got traction, and it actually lasted with adjustments until my retirement in 2022. And at that point, we had spent many years thinking about the succession, the leadership succession. The ownership thing was already done long ago, but the leadership succession, and we had this very aligned leadership team. We spent 3 years intentionally figuring out how to move second generation. And about 6 months before my retirement date, we all looked at each other and we went, we're done here. We've got 6 months to just polish the mirror. Um, so it was a very smooth transition. They are doing remarkably well, thriving. It's thrilling to watch. It's now a 50-year-old company. And as you said, I have moved on to more writing and guiding companies from the original founder to becoming a worker co-op. Very exciting work.
Yeah, that's very cool and very, cutting edge, leading that charge for sure all those years ago. So props to you there. You really have practiced what you preach around the thoughtful leadership transition. What does succession planning done well? What does that actually look like here in the construction industry?
So I don't think it matters what you're succeeding to. What matters is, I think people think that it's not that big a deal. I think it's a very big deal, and it needs years of planning. So I advise people that often it makes sense to disentangle the ownership change from the leadership change. The ownership change is largely transactional, and you can do that mid-career. What mostly happens is people get toward the end of their career, they're ready to retire, and they go, oh my God, now what am I going to do? And how are we going to transition this company? Or do we just have to close the doors? But if in mid-career you do the ownership transition with a long runway to the leadership transition, and that gives you time to develop internal leadership, or if that doesn't successfully happen, hiring from the outside and bringing people on board. So I think that the intentionality is the real thing. Serious planning, whatever the route you take.
Yeah, I love the intentionality aspect of it. I think with so many things in life, it comes back to how intentional are you to make it succeed? How do you advise people to really kind of check the ego at the door to look for who has those good leadership capabilities? Because when you're the founder, it's your baby. There's a lot of pride, and rightfully so, in what you've created, but sometimes that can be a hard thing to be like, I'm the only one that can run this successfully in the way I want to do it. To look around for those leaders that they might do it differently, but would be very impactful leaders. How do you advise in that kind of mindset?
Well, that's the thing, is to look for models, and there are plenty of them out there, where internal leadership has been built successfully. And to start early on, and where it really starts is, as Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, says, you got to get the right people on the bus. So
Right.
it starts with hiring. And instead of hiring for skill set, we can train people to do things. We can't change who they are. Hire as if you're imagining this person as a future owner. So it starts with hiring, and then what's next, I think, that's so important, is transparency. Bring people into the workings of the business and absorb their ideas, use open book management. I mean, this was a lesson that one of my great regrets in my career is that I learned all too late about that. I always thought it was my job to protect everybody from stress, handle the stress, take care of business, and free people to do their work. But it turns out that people want to be involved and want to help solve the problems rather than being shielded from them. And that's how you develop leadership.
Yeah, so lots of good things. Jotting down a couple things while you were just talking there. I think with the thing that comes to mind is being able to crowdsource problem solving, because it gives a sense of ownership to all the employees that are there, and they're able to kind of lock arms with each other to figure it out, and then that builds trust with each other. If you are taking it all on yourself, while it's a noble act, it comes across as like, oh, they're keeping something from me because I clearly don't want to see it. So it actually does more harm than good there. And then on the culture front, when you mentioned hiring, culture and the soft skills is massively critical, yet gets overlooked. I'm down here in Atlanta, so I'm home of Chick-fil-A here, and they take forever to hire somebody. bring them in because they really want to make sure that they are the right culture
The
fit.
right people.
And
Yeah.
that's massive. And that's why Chick-fil-A has the culture that it has, because they take so much care, and back to the intentionality.
Yeah.
They're very intentional about who they bring into the company and who they don't.
Well, we learned this by experiencing, in the early days, somebody would come in and say, "Hey, I got a friend. He's really great, wants a job." And I'd say, tell him to show up on Monday. But then 30 years later, that same person would still be there. And was that the person that you really wanted to carry on? Probably not. So that's what taught us about hiring future owners. And I'll say that when I learned about transparency and engagement, my greatest lesson, and as I say, came kind of late in my career, was in 2008, the crash of 2008, which I say is the second best thing that ever happened to South Mountain Company, because there was this cascade of like dominoes. Our pipeline disappeared, and we had to think hard about how we were going to keep this company alive and how we were going to rebuild it. And it couldn't be hidden. It couldn't be absorbed. We had to bring everybody in. And, it was incredible what happened. People really dug in. And we came up with kind of 6 actions that we were going to take if the unthinkable happened. And the unthinkable was, for decades and decades, everybody come to work every day of every week of every month of every year and have great work to do. And suddenly that was in danger. So we thought about this tiered set of actions: voluntary furloughs, time reductions across the board, pay reductions across the board. I can't remember all 6, but I'll never forget the day that we had a company meeting, and I announced that we were going to reduce compensation 20% across the board. And not a single person left. And after that meeting, people came up to me and thanked me. And I said, "What do you think? Did you get it? Your pay is dropping 20%. And they said, "But so is yours. And you're making more money than I am." So there was just this incredible feeling of being in it together. And then we had the time. So we relentlessly assessed the strengths and the weaknesses of the business, and how to rebuild it and how to improve it. So it turned out to be, there were tremendous silver linings to that crash.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's when a lot of that comes out, when your back's against the wall and you have to think creatively and you got no other option, but it's kind of like the burn the bridges mentality, that the only way to go is forward, and you got to figure it out. And
And
construction
you
has
got to
such
share
great
the
problem
load.
solvers. Yeah, exactly.
You got to share the load.
Love it. So how early should business leaders really start to think about their exit?
Well, this is really, first of all, I'd say today, no matter where you are if you're a startup, or you want to think about where you want to end up from the beginning. But in terms of seriously thinking about it, it's really interesting, Todd. I am working with a half a dozen companies, guiding them through the conversion to worker co-ops. And only one of those companies has a founder in his 60s. The rest of them are all in their 50s, and they want to work another 10 or 15 years. And I think that's ideal, because you can work through the ownership transition. It's such a great way to engage everybody in what comes next. And if the employees, the long-term employees at least, are going to become owners, then they're going to look hard. They're going to work hard with you to make the best transition possible. And by the founder staying on for, as I said, 10 or 15 years, that reduces risk to the new owners, because the person who built the business is there, and you don't have massive change and major transition all at once.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I say when founders are in their 40s or 50s is a great time to start the process.
Yeah. So when you're talking about ownership transition and stuff. How does it typically go when the former owner remains in the business, and like how do you cede some of that control and
This is
ownership,
a
not in like the business sense, but like ownership of the day
yeah,
to day, and how do you deal with all that?
this is a great question, and it doesn't have any kind of simple answer because there is the desire on the part of the new owners to take the steering wheel 100%.
Right.
But they often there's a fear of doing that because if the founder walks out the door, maybe you have not yet developed enough leadership to really keep the business running beautifully. And in most cases, you just haven't. And so then you get to do that to start developing that leadership. Hopefully, there, I mean, I think that, a friend of mine says the health of an organization is inversely proportionate to the number of undiscussables. You know what I mean? So if you can eliminate undiscussables and be able to put anything on the table, then the new leadership and the founder or the founding partners, if they can talk frankly about it, then they can figure out when's the appropriate time for me to walk out the door and to what degree, and just figure out what feels good to everybody, because what everybody is invested in is in the success of the company. And if you can create that mentality that we're all about not our individual interests, but the success of the company, then you can lay it on the table. And it won't work beautifully every time. Sometimes owners just can't let go. And the people who are the younger generation moving forward feels confined. I mean, this happened in our company at times when people felt like I was exercising too much control, but people were able to say that. And so again, transparency, frank and honest conversation that's respectful and that values the success of the business above all else.
Yeah. I love the idea of being mindful of the undiscussables. I'm reading the Simon Sinek's book right now of Leaders Eat Last. I don't know if you've read it.
I
It's a
have
great
it.
book so far, and he talks about very similar to what you were just talking about of this concept of the circle of safety, and the tendency is to try to confine like your the small circle of safety as you can, because you want your people that are loyal to you, and
Yeah,
that's it. That's your core people. But that breeds a terrible culture, because then everybody's suspicious of each other and trying to break into those circles. And the
exactly.
more you can expand that safety circle to the entire company to reduce those numbers of undiscussables, the healthier the culture is, and the more people are going to be invested in your company. So it's like open up the books, like have transparency, have that open and frank conversation, and that's way
That
more inviting.
sounds like a great book. I'm going to have to look for that. And even to take it one step beyond, as we start to see ourselves as servant leaders, that our job is to serve all those other interests and facilitate the success of the company, then not only do we eat last, but we serve.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, I think that's the whole crux of it right there, is that servant leadership mindset, and taking ego out. And you mentioned a phrase a couple minutes ago of when everybody's focused on the success of the company and rowing in that direction, then it kind of it strips the ego out, because it's like we're all on the same team here. Okay, we all got the same
Yeah.
goal and the same vision, and let's link arms together. And whatever gets us to that goal and accomplishes that the best is great. Have at it. Like there's
As
you
a
and me.
friend of mine used to say, "Yep, all the wood behind a single arrow."
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like it. So, for those who haven't explored it that much, can you kind of give a little quick synopsis of what is employee ownership and cooperative? What does that look like, and what should they be considering when thinking about converting to that style?
So there are different kinds of employee ownership, and The most widespread in the US is the employee stock ownership plan, which is there are highly democratic ESOPs, but it does not have that kind of democracy built into the structure as a worker co-op does. But worker co-ops are the most common form of employee ownership. And then there's a third form that is just becoming, it is the most widespread form of employee ownership in Great Britain. It's called the Employee Ownership Trust. It's just come to this country. There are maybe 50 or 100 in the US at this point. And, different types of employee ownership appeal to different people. So I think it's really important that people explore the options. I'm a worker co-op junkie, but I wrote this book for founders who are thinking about their transitions. And so I wrote about all of the different kinds to give people a sense of the differences. But so you can't say what are the characteristics of an employee-owned company because there's such a wide range. But the most important thing, I think, and it applies to all of them, is that when you're looking for what is the right price to do a buyout, an employee buyout, you need to satisfy three things. You get a professional valuation done, and that gives you context. But then how does that number compare to what the owner was expecting to get from their business? And how does that number that the owner was expecting, what's the ability of the business to pay that over time and to still be profitable and have money to distribute to the employee owners? So you're trying to mesh those three things into the right deal. And that takes professional help. It's not a do-it-yourself job, converting to employee ownership.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet lots of complexities to think through. Yeah. Nuances of that, I'm sure as well. What advice would you give to founders who maybe are more fearful that the company's purpose might get lost once they leave and go through this transition?
Well, that's such a great question. One of the things certainly of the worker co-op and even more the employee ownership trust is that you can bake into the agreement, the sale agreement, the purpose of the business. And the extreme version of this is what Patagonia did, and several others, Zingerman's is another one, with a perpetual purpose trust, so that the purpose owns the business. And so there are varying degrees of that, but you can protect the purpose, protect the mission in the new arrangement.
Yeah, that's cool. What's your vision for the future of employee ownership in the States, especially here in the construction industry?
So, from the 1930s to the 1970s, unions were able to achieve much higher wages and benefits for working people in this country. And wealth inequality diminished tremendously. At the end of that period of time in the 1970s, the average CEO made 20 times the average working person. Today, it's 300 times. If worker pay had kept up with CEO pay, the minimum wage today would be $100 an hour, more than $100 an hour. Nothing of that sort has happened. Neither Democrats or Republicans or corporations have pulled the workers along. They have been left in the dust. And I think that employee ownership is an answer to that. So my hope is that as right now there are 3 million over 55 founders of small businesses in the US, something is going to happen to those businesses in the next 15 or 20 years. Trillions of dollars of wealth is going to change hands. And the reason I wrote this book is because I would like to see in some modest way that it affect what happens to these businesses in the US. Most accountants and attorneys and bankers and business brokers and financial planners, most advisors to small business people have no idea about these ownership options that are available. So my hope is that it will. Now, there is tremendous growth in employee ownership, or at least tremendous interest right now. And I think that if that turns into widespread, if employee ownership becomes the number one small business succession option, it would change the symmetry of our culture. It would change business in America and change people's lives. So that's my hope. I'm not hoping for much.
Just life's changed. I like it. You got to dream big. So as we wrap up, a couple rapid fire questions for you. What does the phrase modeling the future, what does that mean and look like to you?
I think I just said it, but it really means knowing where you want to go, figuring out where you want to go, and following that dream.
Yeah, I like it. What about innovation? What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation, I think, comes when people really are encouraged, allowed, and inspired to work together. All of us know and think a lot more than any one of us. So innovation to me means putting people together and trying to figure out what we want to do, what we want to invent, and what that dream is.
I like it. How do people find out more information, get your book, or connect with you?
AbramsAngel with 2Ls.com. AbramsAngel.com. And the book, you'll find the book on our website, but if you go to Amazon or bookshop.org or any place else, it's From Founder to Future, a business roadmap to impact, longevity, and employee ownership. From Founder to Future.
Awesome. We can link to that in the show notes as well, too, to make it easy for people. So
That'd
final question for you, John. If I could give you all construction power, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in construction. What would you pick to innovate?
Ways that super high quality, high performance, affordable housing becomes more widespread.
It's a good one. A big problem to solve in the industry for sure.
Yeah.
Now, John, thanks so much for taking the time and joining. We are just scratching the surface. I know that there was a lot of trails that I could have gone down. So thanks for taking the time and scratching the surface with us.
Great, Todd. It's great to talk to you, and I really appreciate what you do.
Thank you. Right back at you. And now it's time for my Todd takes from this episode. First take. Culture doesn't just happen. It's built on purpose. If you want a strong, healthy company culture, it takes daily intentional effort. It means aligning your values with your decisions and walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Culture should be something you actively shape, not something you inherit or hope works itself out. Second take. Hiring isn't a race, it's a responsibility. The best teams come from hiring slowly and with purpose. When you prioritize values, character, and long-term fit over speed or resume flash, you end up with people who strengthen, not strain, the culture you're trying to build. And finally, trust grows when everyone gets a seat at the table. Some of the best solutions come from opening up tough questions to the whole team. When people are invited to help solve problems and shape decisions, trust deepens and ownership expands because everyone feels like their voice actually matters.